Ashley, tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into the world of data science, machine learning, and AI.
Yeah, so it was an exciting journey. I think a lot of people get into this discipline by accident, but I think that's actually why so many people are good at what they do. Is you come with a totally different perspective from your background. And so I was coming from just pure linguistics, humans talking to other humans, a humanities background. But then I saw this great course, actually, and it was called Computational Linguistics. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what that is. How do computers talk to each other? I thought that's what it was. And so I took the course. I got very interested in it. Eventually getting even more interest, went into working with some things with NATO, so the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was very exciting, doing a lot of things with their exploration into cybersecurity and data science and things. Before that, those were really buzzwords. And I specifically remembered doing some research for NATO on cybersecurity. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I've never heard of that word before. This was before the major security attacks and all of these things. So I really got involved in that. And through the course of a lot of the things I was doing, I started working with more Department of Defense and publishers that were in the engineering community, and that's kind of where I've stayed. So I'm working in publishing and standards and doing machine learning with those folks. So that's where I came from.
And you did some really interesting words on, or the linguistics on words and how they
Yep.
mean different things to different people
Yep.
and the different contexts. Could you maybe share a little bit of an example about that?
Yeah, so the thing that machines don't get is humans. Right? It understands what you teach it, but machines do not understand idioms, for instance, and those are across the board. There's a lot of different cultures. It doesn't matter what language you're speaking. There are different idioms. The other thing that is fascinating are what are called fictional or made up languages. They are still relevant. There's content that comes through. People speak Klingon, believe it or not.
That is
So
so crazy.
yes, yeah. So being able to use machines to mine out the context of what these things actually mean, you do have to understand these other even made up languages. So, for instance, when I'm looking at social media posts, this is a very common place that people mine with NLP. You really have to understand what kind of information you're looking at. There's some popular things in the press, like biases that are coming through, some racism coming through for machine learning being trained on this kind of content. So some of the things that I was looking at is, if somebody is saying, I'm going to the bank, a machine would not know what that means. I have to teach it the difference between a financial institution and a waterway, right? But then when you start to look at other things with social media, you'll notice things where somebody says, I'm going to the bank and getting red balloons. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why is that happening? And when that's the beauty of machine learning is you can analyze such a vast amount of data that you can really understand the strangeness that's in there. And so when we were doing these analyses, we were finding we quickly could identify the chatbots because they didn't talk like a normal person. So there's a lot of old school research into this. Hobbes has discourse analysis. That's something I would highly recommend anybody that wants to get into this to read up on, because it's not just talking about how words mean things. It's when I'm talking to someone, I use certain language, I use certain vocabulary, I put things together in a certain way. And that's how you do the best machine learning.
Yeah, which is absolutely fascinating, which is a conversation in itself. So tell us about making the move from academia to industry, because it isn't always necessarily straightforward.
It is not. I actually just came from a conference where I was shocked. There is still an overwhelming miscommunication, I think, and that is you need more experience. It's not experience doing NLP. It's not experience doing text analytics. It's actually when I'm hearing the business people say that, they're really saying you don't have business experience. Now, that doesn't mean that I think every person coming from academia needs an MBA, a master's of business, but it does mean that you have to be, and this is my big piece of advice, you have to be able to understand why you're doing these things. When you're in academia, you are tasked with asking questions. It doesn't mean that the answers to those questions will be used for anything. It's just, hey, why is the sun yellow? And that's okay. That is academia, and we need that. That is what academics do. However, when you move into business and applying it in different applications than what academia works with, you have to have an end goal in mind. And often I do work with a lot of PhDs that I hire for the work that I do. And that is the biggest pain point that they have is, a great example, it just happened yesterday where we're experimenting with knowledge graphs. Okay, so these are really cool, a lot of people working on them. It's really hard to figure out what to do with them though. So we're experimenting with giving a piece of a knowledge graph away for free so people can learn from it and do things with it. Talking to one of the PhD folks that is new to my team, she immediately replied back and she said, well, I don't understand what we mean by why do we have to give something away for free? Why can't we give the whole thing for free? Or why, so she didn't really understand the context as to why we were doing things. So really being able to ask a lot of questions, a lot of why, or who is this going to help? Is always really important.
And
Yep.
what about influencing other different decision makers who maybe mightn't be technical or actually speaking the same language?
Yeah, cutting down on the jargon is one. You have to use that jargon to a certain extent because it gives you street cred, right? When you are talking to
Sure.
someone and you start rattling off very quickly all the verbiage, they quickly say, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Once you get to that stage, though, you have to quickly dial it back and say, okay, how do I talk to a normal person about this? And my best advice, and I actually just again told my newest PhD on staff about this. I said, she has a 4-year-old. I said, talk to your 4-year-old. If she can understand what you're talking about, then you can talk to a CEO.
Oh, the 4-year-old test. I love it. It's a really, really good, that 4-year-old test. I like to do the 10-year-old test, but 4-year-olds are pretty good because my son's 5, so I get that.
Yeah, yeah. And coming up with examples, that's not to say that CEOs and folks at that level are not intelligent. They're very intelligent. That's why they are where they are. But you also have to remember they have a 1-second attention span, and they only have that much time to dedicate to what you're telling them. So you have to be very clear, concise, and quickly get to the punchline.
So clear, concise, purposeful, understanding the problem that you're trying to solve and
Mhm.
understanding impact to the business.
Yes.
So that's communication and the
Yeah.
importance of making that move from academia to industry. Tell us about the importance of being purposeful about your new job opportunities or
Mhm.
building relationships and kind of
Yep.
knowing where you want to go in the world of data science and AI.
Yeah, so data science and AI is a big world, and I think there's so I have actually taught college students in these spaces, and what I have noticed is a lot of students just don't know where to go and what to do, so they really heavily depend on the university to or even their professors to say, hey, here's this opportunity, go do this. But you really have to take your career in your hands and just reach out. A lot of the really good experience that I've had that has led to great job opportunities has been through me just going out and saying, hey, there's these companies that are local. I'm going to go and talk to them. I'm going to say, hey, these are the skills I have. Can I work on something with you? And most of the time, you're going to have to do it for free, but it gets you that business understanding, that experience, and it also gets you connections so that someday that person that you were working with is at a conference and they hear there's a job and they say, oh, I know so and so, they're really good at this, I've worked with them.
Yeah, and I work with candidates every day, and the first thing I'm saying to them is, what's your experience? Have you done an internship? Have you built some credibility that the next employer is going to be thinking that you can fast track their success? And it's always about fast tracking your employer to their
Yep.
success too.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing, because you're Director of Data and Semantic Enrichment at EBSCO. Tell us a little bit what you're doing at the moment at EBSCO.
Yeah, so semantic enrichment is a fun universe. So my whole job is looking at the vast amount of published material. So EBSCO Information Services is a provider, an aggregator of all the scholarly articles in the world, and we serve those up in a search engine. So that's easy. Search engines are commonplace. Lots of people use them. But what I do is I look at that research and say, okay, how do we read between the lines to not just look at that information that's on the page, which is explicit, but looking at the implicit information that's hidden between the lines, so that when a person comes to search with us, they're getting answers to their knowledge questions rather than just information.
Fantastic. And actually, tell us a little bit where you see the future going of data science, machine learning, AI. There's so much hype around there. There's so much
Yeah.
buzzword bingo. Where do you see the kind of the natural area in your area?
Yeah, so there's actually a great survey that they do every year on KD nuggets, and they talk about what size the data sets are usually that people are working on. And the difference between a person that does statistics or somebody that does analytics and a data scientist, there's a lot of differences, but one of the big ones is the size of the data. To be a data scientist, you need to be working with terabytes or petabytes of information, whereas an analyst could look at something that's, in the gigabyte range. And actually, that is what most people are looking at. This survey also indicated that academics and industry are working on the same size of data sets. So that's interesting. So they probably are using a lot of the same data sets. So the future, I think, is really tied to two big things, I think, in industry. The first is IoT, which is the Internet of Things. And the second is cybersecurity and open access. So IoT is a lot of data coming in from dispersed places. Being able to first normalize that data in some kind of canonical, normalized way is incredibly important. Data scientists are definitely going to need to know how to do this. And a lot of it is also time series data, and that's very tricky. So it's really important to bulk up your skills in how to use that. And this IoT information really is touching every industry on the planet. Most people know this when they're talking about like the Alexa examples,
Yes.
but people like manufacturing, for instance, are using it to understand when machines are going to break, or farming is using it to understand when the best time to put a crop in, right? So it really does span everything, and it's really
Yes.
changing the globe.
Uh,
Um,
which is fantastic, because you said farmers, maintenance, which is so
mhm.
important, because you could have a 50 million or $50
Mhm.
machine that, if it breaks down, you could wipe out a company's profits, because
Exactly.
they can't ship their products to market, or it could be an airplane that,
Mhm.
if you can't have it breaking down while it's up in the air, right? So you need
Yep.
to know at optimal times when to maintain that system.
Yeah, and there's two things in there that are not not on the surface, right? And it is predictive analytics and false positives. So you just mentioned, well, you don't want the aircraft breaking down. Well, you also don't want the sensors to go off and tell you it's breaking down, and you delay flights when there's really no problem, right? So you want to
Right.
make sure that doesn't happen. And then the second piece of that is predictive. So there is a real world example, and I can't tell you the companies because that's proprietary, but there is a manufacturer of farming equipment that, because they have been using IoT on all of their systems, they actually knew when the crops from a certain year were not going to be doing so well, which means they were not going to be getting as many sales as they were anticipating, so they didn't make as many tractors that year.
Which is fantastic. And we've got millions of different examples like that, which is a
Mhm.
really, really good application. You're listening to AI Mentors. I'm Mark Kelly, your host today, and I've been speaking to Ashleigh Faith, Director of Data Science Semantic Enrichment at EBSCO. Ashleigh, thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, well, thank you.